I would not get anything. No one would hire me. I would be jobless, right? Which is why I once thought of going to India to go back to work.
Even giving a overworkload is kind of a bullying.
Even calling someone outside of our house, now we have a law against that.
So, in your opinion, why even in 2025 we still struggle to talk about mental health?
Community doesn't talk about mental health now. We know that mental health has become an increasing issue since 2010.
For anyone who's not a trained certified counselor, how they can help their friends or family? Is there any symptoms or signs they can look for?
Signs could be anything that make you feel uncomfortable. So for me, my sign was I was unsatisfied.
Due diligence on relationships or friends, that is the right fit for me or not. In your opinion, how and what should we teach our kids differently? What we have learned?
Even before you start to think about what to do, both the parents have to be on the same page. So if one parent is saying that, you need to do better, that's pointing fingers at the other parent.
Most people don't think about it is actually interviewing the counselor.
Correct.
Who gonna help you.
Applies to suicide as well. We don't talk enough about suicide.
Men's mental health, which is definitely I would like to touch the point on.
It's like Mard Pano is a famous terminology like that we all came up with.
Welcome back to another episode of Real Talks with Rohit Jaichand. Today's episode is one that matters more than ever, as we are diving deep into the topic of mental health with the person who is on the front line of this conversation. Our today's guest is Vinay Nair, who is a mental health counselor and founder of Stride Network. He is also a facilitator at Are You OK for multicultural communities and our advisor at St. John Ambulance Victoria. In this episode, we talked about the warning signs you missed, how to support others, even if you are not a certified counselor. If you have ever struggled to speak up or support someone who is hurting, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Let's welcome Vinay in our studio. Welcome, Vinay. Thanks for giving us your time today.
My pleasure.
Let's start with your journey. How did you decide to come into mental health?
Look, I come from the south of India. I grew up in a few different parts and decided to come to Australia in 2003 when initially I was going to go to the US with like every South Indian who wanted to pursue computer science engineering. That was my trajectory. So I had already got admission, but 9/11 happened, and then there was visa restrictions and war in place, and that didn't eventuate and work out. So Australia was the next best option. I don't know why I didn't consider UK or Canada, but I'm glad I didn't. I was looking for something just more laid back. So I came here to do my IT degree. So I finished my master's in IT, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was struggling with adjusting to a new environment, even though I was really excited to be here. I had never been overseas for a long period of time by myself before. So that was always, I didn't realize how much of a challenge it was going to be. It wasn't necessarily a mental health issue. I wasn't experiencing anxiety, depression. Maybe there was some of that, in hindsight, but I was struggling with how I was feeling. I wasn't feeling great. I wasn't satisfied with my life. I felt like I was living in Australia, but I wasn't enjoying the Australian life. So, that led me, I was having other challenges going on in my life as well. And I ended up in counseling to talk about how frustrated I was feeling and how angry I was feeling from time to time. And, I enjoyed that process so much. And I decided to, I asked the person, where did you go and learn how to be a counselor? Because I was getting some, I was working in IT and I was getting some feedback saying that my customers liked how I approached them, and they felt respected and they didn't feel like an idiot for asking questions about IT stuff. So, I kind of put two and two together and thought, I'd like to do this for myself. So, thankfully the Australian, government was kind enough to give HECS. So I didn't have to pay anything up front. I could do it part-time. I could do it in the evening. So I just started that way. I started being curious, and I was also already volunteering in mental health. So, and that's how I made that shift. So I started studying, counseling at a university at part-time. Took me twice the time as a normal student would to finish the course. But, I was working. I managed to find a job in mental health during that process as well. So that was about 16, 17 years ago. So yeah, IT graduate, but now work in mental health.
So with this job, like I think before you started your business, you were working in Are You OK Foundation, and you have also worked with Victorian Chamber of Commerce, right? How did you get into those roles?
Yeah. So I mean, even though I qualified as a counselor, because I was volunteering in mental health, I was already doing different kinds of work, like using my counseling skills in different roles. So whether it's a manager role, so I moved into education sector where I was managing a team, educating students on counseling. So it was like an RTO, and then from there I went into a learning consultant role for a non-for-profit teaching mental health. And then, from there I was thinking about, what else do I need to add to my, to my skill set. So I could, at that point I could facilitate. I could, I had an understanding of mental health, but I didn't know how mental health was talked about in the workplace. So there was a role that came up, and then I thought, okay, maybe I can translate and transfer some of my skills. And they gave me the opportunity to learn about, health and safety regulations in Australia. What does psychological safety mean? So I kind of that way I got involved. And I've always been the kind of person who likes to put my foot forward if there is, if there's an opportunity. So I saw an email from IUOK saying they were looking for people to co-design a multicultural resource. And I said, I just filled out a Google kind of, survey. And then 1 month later, I got a phone call from someone at IUOK saying we were looking for someone who could help us with our Hindi resource, because Hindi resources are the most downloaded resource from IUOK. I didn't know that. And I wouldn't have gotten that opportunity if I didn't put that foot forward. But, look, that's what I tell people. If you want, if you're passionate about something, give it a shot. Definitely. Unless it's if it's a venture, like a business, then you obviously have to do your due diligence. But this was me, asking that I could volunteer my time to do some work. So that's how I got involved in all of these different.
And especially with Are You OK, as you mentioned, like you put your step forward, so volunteering for that role. How did that role treated you?
So, so by the time I was already, working with Are You OK, they wanted to bring me on board as a facilitator. So they wanted me to get together a group of people from Indian background who could talk about mental health, and we co-designed a brochure. So up until now, in Australia, whatever brochures you get in other languages, for example Hindi, it's a translation of what is in English, right?
Correct.
Now we know that we don't, one word can mean 10 different things in Hindi and many other languages. That's not accounted for in translation that happens in Australia at the moment.
Yep.
So any resource that's out there, I feel like it doesn't hit the mark. It's about halfway there. It's like looking at directions without necessarily having all the guidelines. You just have to kind of figure out, like how in India when they say, Sida jaake, go right, go left, whatever they say, right?
Yeah.
And they give you very general directions. That's how I feel like the translated brochures are these days. They don't give people. So, that was my focus, is to try and find a way to make it more meaningful for people from multicultural backgrounds. Because you and I, we never got introduced to mental health when we were in India.
Never.
Right? There was no language for mental health. There was no verbiage for mental health. Mental health, when you translate into Hindi, sounds like something terrible. Sounds almost like a mental illness.
Yep.
But it's not. It's two different things. So that was my focus. And that's what we tried to do. So we tried to create a brochure that looks very different to a normal flyer in English. It has a Bollywood theme in it, because we thought, that's something that people can relate to. People might pick it up. It's written completely in Hindi, and it does not mention the word mental health even once throughout the brochure. Talks about stress, talks about worry, the things that bother us, talks about sadness, right? So I think that's where we, that was my big aha moment, is starting to realize that, we need to talk about mental health using terminology that people relate to. If you talk about mental health in the medical terms, then it's always going to be treated like a disease.
Agree. Any numbers we can share, if you don't mind, right? If anybody wants to talk about their mental health or they need help, how they can approach to you, or Are You Okay?
Yeah. So Are You Okay is a suicide prevention promotion charity, right? So what they do is they give people resources that will help them when they need. So Are You Okay is more about awareness building. So Are You Okay is not a crisis service. So if people go on the Are You Okay website, they can see the different languages. So at the moment, Are You Okay has co-designed new resources in Hindi, in Arabic, and in Vietnamese.
Right.
Each of these different groups have tried different ways. The Arabic community went with a video. They made a video for their community to improve the awareness around mental health. The Vietnamese community, they came up with a different kind of flyer for talking about mental health differently, but all unique, right? People can go and order these brochures for free. They can also order small postcards. And at the back of these brochure and the postcard, there's information on who to ring if people need help. And obviously, they can reach out to me, if they need additional support, because it is a very challenging system, the mental health system in Australia at least.
So, in your opinion, I just want to know, why even in 2025 we still struggle to talk about mental health?
There is, because it has never been introduced into our vocabulary, right? If you think about our parents, why would they go out of the way to learn about mental health unless there is someone in the family who needs their support? Gotcha. And the community doesn't talk about mental health now. The community hasn't been trained how to talk about mental health. We know that mental health has become an increasing issue since 2010. When phones and social media started to kind of combine together. That's when we started to see mental health issues start to impact people. But if you go to India, if I had to find a job in India saying that I'm a mental health consultant, kuch nahi milega. I would not get anything. No one would hire me. I would be jobless, right? Which is why I once thought of going to India to go back to work. And I was thinking, "Ye to nahi hoga bhai." It's not possible. I won't get the respect. I won't get the opportunity to speak. Right. I'll be fighting. I'll be like some kind of a political activist who is drowning.
Agree.
Right?
Agree with that.
That's but when you come to Australia, people have the same mentality still. They still think about mental health issues as something taboo, something very shameful. So when we come here, we still in that mindset and we don't talk about it. Even though Australia provides so many support services, no one accesses it. I mean, unless they desperately need, because they think, ye ghar ka mamla hai, we'll sort it out at home, right? Ghar se hi to mamla problem hua hai. So, how will we sort it out at home? We need external support, but people don't know who to trust.
So on to that, as you mentioned, some of the people actually, they don't realize that they have some issues that they need external support on that. Is there any symptoms or signs they can look for so they can come to know, okay, they need external support or they need someone they can talk to and who can give them a solution for that particular problem?
So, before I come to symptoms and signs, because of social media, everyone is an expert these days.
I agree with that. It's
there is
so much false information is getting shared.
There is apparently a natural solution for everything. There is a medical solution for everything, right? Yep. Google can give you 1 million answers for everything, but people still don't know what to do because there's so much choice, right? Ye kar sakte ho, wo kar sakte ho, so, and often now we are so used to giving opinion that we think our opinion is fact. We are so used to commenting on other people's posts and what other people say. Now, every time we see a symptom, we see someone behaving differently, we have our opinion. People feel judged. What we see is, as a symptom is not necessarily what the person is experiencing. If that person is sad, he might appear angry, but he's actually sad. So we might go and say, you're angry, you shouldn't behave this way, you should go to anger management, blah, 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 counseling. And we tend to kind of put shame on the person. We blame the person, we label the person. And then, how is the person going to recover from that? Right? We need to treat a human like a human being who needs support. But for that, sometimes, people are so used to hiding behind masks that it's very difficult to see. Right? There are some common signs and symptoms you can see. But often, what I say is that when you notice something different about a person, you have to know this person well enough, right?
Definitely.
I wouldn't, first time seeing you, I wouldn't be deciding, okay, he looks a bit different, he must have this issue or that issue, right? You have to know you for a little bit, because some of it can be routine, some of it can be habit, so it's not something different. Mm-hmm. So a sign or a symptom is only something that's causing a person any kind of damage, or is it bothering them? If they don't feel affected by it, if someone's gambling problem or tobacco problem doesn't bother them, then, all you're doing is nagging the person by highlighting it to them. Okay. Correct? So people have to have some sort of awareness.
Mm-hmm. I would like if you can elaborate a bit on, especially, so as a person, if I want to know about myself, for example,
about yourself,
that I'm actually struggling with that kind of particular mental issue, how I can come to know.
Okay. So I would say it's very important not to go and self-diagnose.
Definitely.
Okay. So definitely, yes, there are, lots of influencers who might be saying lots of good things. There are also people, who are saying, written a lot of good books about it. At some point, it goes from, you being able to look after yourself, so self-help, to you needing someone else to talk to. Especially if you're living in an environment where you feel kind of, unsafe, or you're feeling very sad. You're losing your appetite, you're losing your motivation, your work is struggling, your relationships, you're constantly having arguments. These days, people don't have necessarily big arguments. What they do is argument starts, and then people go their separate ways, and it creates kind of, mistrust within the relationship. So slowly the relationship kind of, breaks apart. So even that, if you have things in your life that, that you're not necessarily happy about, that's a first sign that something is not going right. And I would start by, medication is not always a solution. Counseling is not always a solution. But talking to a trusted person who is not going to judge you is sometimes a solution. And for me, that was unfortunately the counselor. Because, if I speak to my parents, if I speak to my siblings, there's an emotional connection.
100%.
And that means that when they try to support me, they're going to try really hard, or, they're going to come up with different solutions, and it might be in their best interest or the best interest of the family, or, log kya kahenge, all of those types will come into play. But when you go and talk to a counselor, that's what I enjoy, is that I can say what I want. I can complain. I can cry. I can be angry. I can be frustrated, and it doesn't affect the counselor. It's their job. Their job is to help me through that process. So, signs could be anything that make you feel uncomfortable. So for me, my sign was I was unsatisfied. Outside, I was looking fine. I was going to uni. I was working. I was hanging out with my friends. But internally, I felt like, there was something missing.
While we are discussing on, as you mentioned in this, like, people can have small, even arguments in couples, right?
Yes.
You must be working with multicultural communities, right?
Yeah.
So how does the community affects this problem?
I think, look, especially when we come to Australia, right? And we talked about this off camera, is that, we look for community.
Yeah.
We look for people that we know who are already 100%. Living here.
That's
right?
usually. Yeah.
And then we become friends with them. But do we check if this person's values match us before we meet them?
Definitely not.
We're not.
Nobody does that.
Nobody does that. We don't see how their attitude is. We don't see how their bartav is, whether they respect people or not, how are they. So we don't see all that. We just kind of, become part of the group. And then as a result of that, we sometimes end up with people around us who we meet regularly, who are not necessarily best, good people to be around.
ये तो चलो I agree, especially when you're away from your home country.
Correct.
तो वहाँ पे you need someone that you can trust. But as you mentioned that we don't do due diligence on relationships or friends, that okay, that is the right fit for me or not. We just, okay, हमारी community का है, let's get on to it. Would definitely does that.
हमारे एज के बच्चे हैं जो चलो मिलते हैं.
That's usually happens. And how does that affects actually? For example, let's go with example. A couple started going into some group, right? Have you seen anything so far that kind of couple get affected with that group and they end up in fights or arguments because of that particular group or the environment they are staying in?
Yeah. So, I've got, there's I've seen couples who come and say, okay, we, a mutual friend of ours, who's another couple, they're going through separation. My husband, he's taking the side of the husband, the other male partner, and I feel like his wife is she's doing the right thing by going for the divorce, right?
Yeah.
So even in their house, while the other couple is going through separation, they're having an argument about whose side to take.
Got your point,
right? And then on top of that, with parenting, huge thing. Each of us, unless we think about our style of parenting, we are basically our parents doing our parenting again.
Usually.
Yeah. Most of us, some of us will say, I'm never going to do what my parents did to me. I'm going to go the other way. But eventually when you're stressed, you revert back to what you've learned, how you've been parented.
I agree with that.
And sometimes that's problematic. Not all the time, but sometimes it's problematic because our parents didn't necessarily have education or parenting classes to go to. Now parents do, right? So I think, the important thing to remember is that, if you don't have, if there's gossip in your community, that is not a safe place for someone to share openly.
Right.
Because you don't know when your information is going to be used against you.
That's the biggest, I would say, question mark on every discussion you have out of your trusted circle.
Correct.
Right. And as you mentioned, the couple end up fighting because they have taken side. For example, we have taken this.
Yes.
How they can avoid that particular thing? Definitely, they are at that stage. They are good friends of them. They can't step back because they are friends. But at the same time, they have to maintain their peace, basically.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, it's it's important for the couple who are together to try and figure out, what do we believe in, right? It's not about whose side to take. Maybe both of us will talk to each one of them so that they don't feel like we are taking sides, right?
Gotcha.
Usually, what happens is that when a couple separates, one of the members of the couple, unfortunately, loses most of the friendships.
It does happen, I think.
Yeah, because people feel like they have to take sides. And this happens because we don't talk to people about what they want. I'm sorry you're going through separation. We only hear about it afterwards because, people have kept it under wraps.
Yeah.
Right? I think if you're a true friend, you need to be able to spend time with someone and realize that going through separation is a big deal. It's a big deal for someone. And it's a big loss. And people need support to recover, which means people need a friendly person who they can cry, who they can talk to, who they can go for a walk with, who they can think about what their future life looks like. And I think that's more important. And think about, are these people valuable in our life? Do we want to keep them as friends in our life and as a couple? And then, couples then turn on each other, unfortunately, right? Because the ego comes into play. That's a big thing about us Indians too. The ego is always there, right?
I agree at some extent, I would say. I have seen, because as per my managerial jobs, I have worked with multicultural people, right? I've seen that ego stuff pretty much in every community. But the way to express it, it's different. Definitely the way they... I would say the way they grow in the environment they grow.
Yeah, the way they nurture.
Those kind of things actually affect the way you express your ego. So you also mentioned about the parenting. Definitely, that's I would say is the common thing in every family. Doesn't matter which community you are in, especially in migrant communities. It happens. We always ask our parents if you are not sure about something. Can you elaborate on that? In your opinion,
yes,
how and what should we teach our kids differently what we have learned?
Well, what did we learn, as children? I kind of look back at it. We were, as children, we were not told how to bounce back. We were just, get on with it. Kind of, think about the future. Don't think about the past. And, there was no time to kind of, sit and talk about, how sad I feel and whatnot. So, we had to go from one thing to the next. It was always about achieving, being at the top. From that, we have now gone to, if you're a parent now, that if your child participates in any sport, doesn't matter what position they come in, they're going to come up with something. Kuch to achievement aayega unke saath, right? And then, so back in the day, no. If you lost, you lost, right? And, there's second place, third place. But after that, you're by yourself. There's no recognition. So these days, we have switched completely. We've gone 180 degrees. And we've gone, okay, we want to make sure our children are so well supported that we will do everything that, our parents didn't do for us. That's why I think, especially in migrant families, because there's a lack of, this extended family around you, I feel like there's a bit of a gap, and parents trying to fill that gap for their children by doing different things for them. Whether it is, whether it's a pet, whether it's, accessories that they buy for the house, whether it's where they take their kids, to different places. I mean, a 10-year-old these days has probably been to more countries than I could ever imagine going in my life.
I agree.
Right? Because every year parents are like, we'll go to Japan, Korea, this, that, all these different places. So there's so much opportunity for young people, which is very different to how we were parented.
Definitely.
Right? But I don't think parents have been, yes, you give kids opportunity, but how do you also set boundaries for children?
I actually want to know.
Right.
Especially, I would say the circle I'm in, pretty much everyone have young kids, right? And I think that will help the new parents, how they can set those boundaries.
Yeah.
At the same time, like what they want to achieve or what they want to see or where they want to go, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you can shed some light on that.
So, one thing is for sure, kids these days know more about mental health than people in the Middle Ages will ever know. Right? My kids, when they start going to school, they'll be able to come home and, I can, because I'm in mental health, I can tell when they're talking about it. But, I think about the other parents who are not necessarily working in mental health, who might have technical roles, who might have professional roles. And, if they don't talk to their kids about mental health, then, there's going to be a disconnect at the household. You can try and be as caring and loving to your child as possible. But the most important thing right now is to be available for your children as much as possible, and available not as in providing, but with your time. Right? None of this sitting down with your phone, with your kid, right? That's distracted. I mean, yes, it looks basic, and it's like, oh, let me just send a quick email while I'm here. There's no attention. Back in the day, our parents gave us that because there was no distractions. These days, we say, I'm going to take the distraction away from the kid, but who's going to take the distraction away from you?
Gotcha one.
Right? We don't have boundaries for ourselves, so it's very difficult for us to set boundaries for our children, right? So I think, if you're wanting to be a better parent, it's going to take time, right? Many people don't even know that there's a free parenting course available in Australia for anyone who can sign up to. It's an online course. It's called Triple P Parenting. Ads come up, but most people think, parenting is straightforward. I can do it, right?
Right.
Anyone can be a father or a mother, but being a dad or being a mom who a child, still comes to you when they need help in their 20s.
Yeah.
Because I can guarantee you 10-year-olds these days will need more support when they're 20s because, technology and information, doesn't matter how advanced it is, human connection is never going to be replaced.
True.
Correct? And they'll want to be closer to the parents. And, that's not going to happen if parents are not looking at their parenting style. And, then thinking about, okay, what do I need to improve on? In which way am I not kind of, supporting my children, right? Because I noticed frustration and anger and kind of, sleeplessness within myself, wanting the need for distraction. That's how I know that I need to become a better parent, right? So it's a constant exercise.
So, especially with young people, right, or parents, the difference definitely comes in because the way we brought up in totally different environments,
Correct.
especially as a migrants, right?
Correct.
Everybody is from different countries. And the culture
Yes.
and studies they are learning in Australia are different.
Very different, yeah.
So some of us has learned it, some of us haven't learned it fully. So the
we
difference
don't want
gonna
to
be
learn it.
yeah, right. Difference gonna be there.
Yeah, correct.
So how we can fill that gap?
I think it is, first and foremost is to maybe, even before you start to think about what to do, both the parents have to be on the same page, right? So if one parent is saying that, you need to do better, that's pointing fingers at the other parent,
Yep.
Correct? It's about talking, saying, okay, we want to do better, right? What can we do together? So, it could be something basic like even listening to a podcast and thinking about, okay, how do we apply that in our lives?
Gotcha.
It's not taking on too much because parenting in itself is quite tiring, right? But it's about saying, okay, what kind of boundaries do you want to set? And how do we know we're both on the same page? Because one thing children do is they tend to, without even knowing, kind of make parents turn towards each other.
Does happen.
Yeah, does it happen that you end up fighting with your wife saying, because of what you don't, yeah, my kids do that all the time, right? And we both, so because we don't have a shared view on things, that's when that argument happens. If we can trust the other person, the other parent, then it's much easier. So I think trust is important between parents. And if your relationship is just focused on kids, work, going out, and no time for yourself as parents, then, kids, it's going to be, you're going to struggle with parenting because that's one thing, right? Our parents spend a lot of time away from each other doing their things like, mom's role was mainly looking after the house. Father's role predominantly was, going out and working, being the provider. It's changed now. It's a very different dynamic. So we need to, parents, if you're a couple and if you have children, you need to make sure you're spending time on your relationship, not just focusing on the children, because that's what the children learn from, right?
Agreed.
When I have children come to me for counseling, they talk to me about, I never see any affection between my parents.
Right.
I always see them worrying about me, and I tend to worry about, why are they worrying about me? And that makes me worried.
Right. It's actually a valid point, whoever that kid is. So it does happen because that's what I think we have seen in our life. Our parents are worried about us all the time, right? Okay, I'll do this for them. I'll do this for them.
Correct.
So that's how we have seen it, and we are trying to do same instead of thinking about ourselves first. Definitely, it's not selfish, I would say. It's basically you are keeping yourself in check so you can provide them better what they can have.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. That's what I think.
Yeah, and that's totally fine because, like I said, your kids are looking towards you to be role models. Every person who comes to counseling, in their first session, will talk about their relationship with their parents.
Okay.
Right? And I can guarantee you, I think, look, I ask people this, when we can go to the gym 5 days a week for 1 hour a week for our physical health, why can't we go to a counselor once a week for 1 hour for our mental health? Because who is a personal trainer for our mental health? We think that we can be our own personal trainer, right? But if you have a sprain, would you just sit at home and wait for the sprain to go away?
Definitely not.
After a couple of days, you would go and see a physio, right?
100%.
You trust experts. And that's why it's important, with your mental health as well, because there's so much information coming in. It's a good idea to let someone in that you trust,
right,
who can give you some guidance. Because if you're trying to find a solution to while you're stressed, it's not going to be creative.
Right. Especially onto this, like pretty much both of the parents are working different kind of jobs.
Yes.
They have their work stress as well.
Yes, of course.
Some of them end up managing not bringing it at home.
Tell me the addresses of those people. I want to go meet these lovely people.
I have seen few, but especially who are entrepreneurs or business owners or even their businesses are established, they end up bringing that stress at home.
Everyone wants to be one. Yeah.
Want to be one is one thing, and
being one is another thing.
Being one is another thing.
Correct.
And the challenges I think you might be facing now, as you have started your business in this field.
I'm a entrepreneur. I haven't been an entrepreneur yet.
Okay, right. So, especially at workplace, right?
Yes.
If it's their business, how they can manage mental health for their staff instead of like they just, okay, we just tick the box, we are doing it.
That's it. I mean, before COVID, it was like that. Across a lot of Australian businesses, forget multicultural, but a lot of Australian businesses were like, just tick and flick, I mean, mental health is not a problem. People should deal with their own mental health. And then, the rules change, right? So from a compliance perspective, now it's become more and more stringent for workplaces to look after their staff's mental health.
Yep.
If, but often even staff don't realize that workplace affects their mental health. They often think it's their resilience, that I'm not strong enough. That's why I'm failing. That's why I can't deal with this bullying in the workplace. They don't realize that discrimination and workload can have a very significant impact, right?
I agree to that extent. Like most of the staff isn't even aware like what actually workplace bullying. Most of us like thinks, okay, if somebody's harassing you with comments and that kind of stuff, that's just a bullying, right? As working in a managerial roles, I have somehow understand that it's not just that. Even giving a over workload is kind of a bullying.
Even calling someone outside of hours, now we have a law against that. Imagine if you have to have a law against that. How often is it happening? Sounds like common sense, but especially migrant population. Again, our mindset is, I used to work till midnight back in India. I'm going to continue to do that now because that's what hard work means. Means more money or whatever it is, and and then unfortunately people get used, right? So work stress. This is a real big challenge. I would love to see more multicultural business owners looking after their employees' mental health, or at least reaching out and saying, how can I support my employees' mental health better? We don't even, I don't think multicultural business owners want to talk about mental health in the workplace.
Not at all.
Not at all.
As I have worked with Australian businesses as well. Like they are fully owned by Australians. And I have worked with, I would say, different communities.
Yes.
Migrants as well. Everywhere it's same. Only big companies, they do it because of the compliance, right? But small businesses, doesn't matter which community owns it, nobody cares about it.
Especially if they don't have a dedicated HR person, there's no talk happening.
I have seen one of the company, they have HR person.
And the HR person doesn't want to think about it.
Nobody cares because the HR person is from the same background.
Yeah, that's a real big issue I have. But, and that's how people are trying to get around those compliance things is by saying, yep, we've done training, we've got this in place. But who reads the policy, man?
Who even checks that?
Right?
There's no verification procedures that they can be checked. Okay, after training, the knowledge they should have, does they have it?
And the only time that I find business owners doing something about mental health is when it is someone like yourself who's knowledgeable about it, or a business owner who's been through their own challenges. They know what depression looks like, or they've had a family member who's gone through depression, or they have a child who is going through some challenges. Then they're more kind of sensitive or open to support employees. But if you're stuck in a workplace where no one cares about your mental health, Unfortunately, it does happen.
Especially onto that, like, for example, there are businesses who actually want to support their staff, but they don't know where to start. Being not a certified counselor, how they can support their staff or their friends. Let's take it for anyone who's not a trained certified counselor, how they can help their friends or family.
So let me give you an inside secret here, and people who are watching who work in community services will know this. If you work in community services, those services that provide care and support and whatnot, unfortunately, some of those workplaces in itself are quite toxic in nature. You would think that when your job is providing care to others, you'll be caring towards each other. It's not. People are people, right? Unfortunately, so that's what happens. So first and foremost, just because you have a team of caring people, don't expect that everyone's going to be looking after each other.
Right.
They might be caring towards clients, but definitely, they could be threatening towards their team members, right? So don't take anything for granted. That's what I tell. And plus, we do not. Especially me as a workplace trainer, I do not expect managers to become counselors, because if they do, the boundaries are gone. But that's what they do. That's what it ends up. So managers kind of often don't realize when to refer someone to an external person. I would say from the day dot, you should be encouraging the person to access other supports. That's the biggest challenge. 1 in 2 people in Australia do not seek help for their mental health.
Agree.
Right? So that's statistics. And 1 in 5 experience a mental health issue every year. Right? So it's not the lack of support. It's that people are hesitant to seek support because they don't know how their manager or how the workplace will react to that.
It could be, I think, they are not sure where to start.
Correct.
Right. Where to stop and refer them to someone.
Correct.
That they can get the help and they can work better. Because that's what my understanding after working on so many different kind of places, that if you are not mentally well, especially at workplace, you can't be productive. And at the end, if you're running a business, you are losing the productivity of that person, but you're still paying that person to work.
Correct.
Right. In a way, it's lose-lose, I would say.
If the person goes on leave, then also you lose because, you end up paying for that as well. And the person may never come back, right?
Yep.
So that's a real challenge, and thankfully the WorkSafe websites have good information on how to start and what to say, what not to say, right? If people look at Beyond Blue, they have a work section on their website where where there's a good conversation guide. Where I think people lack is that they a lot of business owners will say, this is the information on mental health and that's it, right? They just put it on the notice board and they never talk about it. You have to continue to talk about it. You have to make it easy to talk about, because imagine this, if I was working in your workplace, if I came in with a foot and I was limping, you would ask me, what's happening?
100%.
And, if I kept limping 2 weeks later, you'll say, come on, when I sit down, something's wrong here. Why are you still limping?
Yep.
But if I came in looking depressed, you would think, kuch to chal raha hai ghar pe, let's leave him alone. You would not bother, So we don't make it our problem to check on staff members, right?
Right.
But I'm not saying don't get involved in it. I'm saying if a person looks unwell, you need to check on them and you need to ask them what are they doing, because sometimes they may not know what to do, right? That's where it starts. And then, using these websites as a bit of a guide is a good place. But, definitely, have someone on site who's some sort of an expert who can give you some idea on based on your culture of your organization. Because if your organization has 80% male staff or 80% female staff, the approach to talking about mental health is going to be very different.
Agree.
If your organization has 80% migrant staff, the approach is going to be very different. No point bringing someone in who's going to speak in English, talk about all these different terms about mental health and go away. People will be like, sitting there.
Yeah.
I've had all of those experiences.
It does happen, especially in the workplace where they have multicultural people, right? You can't have one person speaking to everyone because, especially of the language barrier,
Correct.
they might won't understand the way they're supposed to understand that particular mental health section, because as we started the discussion from, even if you are talking about Hindi, one word can have different meaning.
Correct.
The way you said it, the tone you said it makes
Body
a difference.
language.
Everything. So same thing applies up here. I would say that you have to try to have possibly person from the same community that can translate same thing or translate in a better way to them what you are trying to convey to them, I would say.
I mean, not just translate, but also, have some understanding of mental health if they're talking about it, right? Which is what we are kind of, trying to create now with IUK. We are trying to create bilingual facilitators, people who have an understanding of, mental health in Hindi and English. One thing that I would just wanted to add there is that, look, when I went to a counselor for the first time, I went to someone who was white, who was Australian, correct? I felt comfortable there. Sometimes I have people coming to me saying, I went to someone and the first session felt like a history lesson because I was teaching them about my culture. So I wanted to come and see someone who is from my culture, who understands the intricacies of Indian culture. For some people it works, for some people it doesn't. So I tell people, right, when you shop around for a counselor, don't go for the first one. Make sure you interview them, because you're discussing your life's issues with them. You want someone who understands you, who can relate to you, and if you don't feel that, then find someone else.
On to that,
yes,
it's actually a good point, because most people don't think about it is actually interviewing the counselor,
correct,
who gonna help you.
They think a counselor is like a doctor, right?
Yeah, it is.
Because they think they're special.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And especially onto that, like how they can actually interview them.
Yeah.
The counselor won't feel offended. But at the same time, the person who needs the help, he or she can come to know, okay, that's the right person for me or not.
Yeah. So I mean, these days, most of the therapists will have some sort of a web presence.
100%.
Right. So if you go on the website, if it's old or good, you can see, they will often talk about, what their approach is, what they like to talk about. Hopefully one of them has, done a podcast like this, or, you can listen to them, right?
Right. Definitely.
I think it's a good way to actually, hear them, how they speak, what they talk about, and you can hear what they value.
Right.
And that makes sense, right? Sometimes it's the age, sometimes it's the personality that matches. Sometimes, you need someone who is from a different age group because, you want to talk about some relationship, right? So all of that, I think, plays a part. Definitely, some people go with price. Usually, unfortunately, we from the migrant population, go with price all the time.
Most of the times, I would say.
So, but, the thing is, how much you pay, that's what you get. Unfortunately, that's never changed.
That's always a saying, even in our culture, that if you don't pay good price, you won't get the quality.
Yeah.
But just to get that quality, that's the reason I ask you this question, like how they can actually interview them or come to know that's the right fit for them or not.
If the counselor is giving advice, run away, right? Because as a counselor, you're coming in, you're telling me about your life story for 1 hour.
Yep.
I don't have an understanding of everything else that's happening. I am no one to give you advice. A counselor's role is not to give you advice. A counselor's role is to help you come up with solutions so that you feel more empowered with your choice. That's what I do. That's my warning sign, right? If a counselor is interrupting me, if they're talking over me, if they're looking at their phone, if they're distracted, if they're not paying attention to what I'm saying, that's indication that, I'm not going to go back to.
In this, like, you might see a lot of people on daily basis, right?
Yes.
Who need help.
Yes.
How do you manage your mental health while listening to their problems? Because I have seen in few people, that's the biggest trouble. They won't end up managing their self after they get involved basically in others' problem.
Correct.
How do you manage that?
Correct. So some of us are what we call as empaths, right? पता नहीं empaths को क्या बोलते हैं हिंदी में, people who are, people who are nurturing or supportive or whatnot, right? So some of us naturally have that tendency, right? The thing is, people don't pay attention to how sensitive that tendency is.
Yeah.
Because, yes, you can be easy to connect to, but that also means you're easy to take on other people's problems, like a sponge.
Yeah.
Sponge को पानी में डालते क्या होगा? Full हो जाएगा ना? At some point, what happens? The sponge stops, can't take any more water.
Yeah.
You lift up the sponge, water is coming out of the sides. That's what I keep reminding myself. I'm like a sponge. If my sponge is getting full, then there's nothing left in the tank for my wife, for my family, right? And at the end of the day, I have a career so that I can have a better family life, correct? So I tend to focus on that. And which is why, as I was telling earlier, I went from working full-time after having 2 children to working more casual, flexible hours. If I asked the people around me whether I should do that, everyone probably would have said no.
If somebody else, like as I asked you a question before, that if I have to support a friend or any person need to support a friend and a staff member with their problem without being certified counselor,
correct,
how they can manage that?
So your role is to make sure that you can be a supportive person who is not judging anything they say.
Yep.
Right? We don't want to know their life story. That's not our job. So we don't want to be asking too many questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? So why questions are very defensive, right? You want to be, you want to notice what you're saying different, what you're seeing different about the person, right? You might say, Rohit, we usually go out every Tuesday morning for a coffee, and Friday afternoon we have lunch together at that Japanese place. I've noticed for the past 2 weeks we haven't done that, right? If you're, is that busy, or is there something else going on, right? And you invite the person to share. People don't always share.
That's usually like it's my family thing.
Yeah, and they might say that, right?
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, initially people will make an excuse. Chalo yaar, kuch nahi hai, just let's talk about something else. People say that, but it's important to let them know that you're there when they're ready to talk. And that might be 1 week later, that might be the next day, that might be 1 month later, that might be 1 year later, right? You want to let them know that if you need me, I'm here to listen without judgment. That's a very difficult thing to do, because we always want to find a solution for someone else's problem.
That usually happens. But at the same time, as we were talking, they might be the soaker. They might be the sponge. So how they can manage that?
So, make sure, you let people know that, you're there if they want to chat, but you reach out, you respond to them when you're ready. You might say, I might come to you today and say, Rohit, I've noticed, things are not going well. I'm around if you need me, right? Next week, something might happen in my life, right? And then I might start worrying about that. And then you might contact me and I might not be able to respond to you. I might say, Rohit, I've got some stuff going on in my life. I will come back to you when I'm ready, right? That's creating space. It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Because it feels like, you're saying no to someone.
Yeah.
You're just asking for extra time. But you're being honest.
Yeah. That's great point, I would say, to stay in your space and giving them a space at the same time. So nobody intrude in anybody's space. So especially in whole mental health discussion, right?
Yeah.
There are so many myths going on, right? According to you, any particular myth that you think it's purely we should avoid?
Now, one of the biggest myths in mental health is that if you talk about mental health, it'll make things worse, because isko distract karte hai. Let us focus on something else. But that doesn't help the person. It might help you because you've become more comfortable to talk, but it doesn't help the person, right? The myth is avoiding conversation about mental health will make things go away. And the same thing, unfortunately, applies to suicide as well. We don't talk enough about suicide.
No.
And I think, Australia has made it clear, at least if you're living here, you need to be using all the supports. And evidence and research is showing that talking to people when they're feeling, when they're going through a difficult time in their life, which every migrant goes through, unfortunately, whether, talking about it actually makes it easier for people to access support.
Right.
That is a really huge myth that exists in society, that we'll keep everything hush hush.
That's what happens. I agree. Because of this myth, I have seen in so many people, right, especially in men's, in these days, it's in trending, men's mental health, which is definitely, I would like to touch the point on that, especially in migrant communities.
Yes.
Right. In Aussies or the foreigners, right, we use the word for the people outside of our country. They've been taught about it, right? And in our community, as you mentioned earlier as well, that we never spoke about it. Our parents never spoke about it. So if somebody is struggling with that, after learning about the signs, right, they came to know they have mental health issue, they are struggling with depression or something like this, how they can actually open up and have the courage to go to someone, talk about it. Because this is the hardest part, I would say, as a men's. Even it's an ego thing or things been feed in us, right? Men's don't have a pain. So how they can open up?
It's like Mard Bano is a famous terminology like that we all came across, and constantly in every movie also we see that, right? I mean, it's changing thankfully, but it's been a constant kind of a part of every scenario, and even at home, right? Even now, when my wife sees a cockroach, she'll call me. I was like, "मुझे क्यों बुला रही हो? अपने आप चप्पल लेके मारो ना उसको." Like we are, if you want to be equal in every level, we need to realize that even men are scared of cockroaches sometimes, right?
Does happen with some people,
Yeah. So I think men need to feel, first of all, realize, okay, it's okay for me to ask for support, right? Every human being needs someone who can support them. Man, woman, somewhere in middle, whatever you call yourself. That's the truth, right? So yes, there are limitations that you put on yourself. In Australia, we call it the man box. There's been some study done around it, and men have certain rules that they put within themselves, and they don't break the rules with their friends, right? With their family members, with their dads, or with their brothers or whatnot, right? So it's an unwritten rule. Most people don't know about it. So this is a problem. Like, if your community of other men are following these rules, it'll be very difficult for you to break out of them. So I have made it my point to find other men who are comfortable talking about mental health, right? So I had to find different people. So I think for a man who's listening to this and might be struggling, the first opportunity might be to reach out to somewhere like Men's Line in Australia, at least. But or go to a local group, because if you go to a local group which is supporting mental health, especially for men, I can guarantee you'll find 10 other people who feel exactly the same way like you do, and that then makes you feel more comfortable. That's what helped me, knowing that there's other people who are going through something similar. It's not just me. That's another big myth. People think, oh, it's just me. Yeah, but mera problem hai. No, there are other people doing it, and they've overcome it. So having that sense of real community to help you with your mental health, is important, because whether in a family, a man's role is just as important as anyone else's role.
Is there any tools or any habit that if somebody is struggling from mental health issue or depression, they can actually use or implement in their daily life, so they can avoid it if they don't like to go to some counselor, right, who can help them? Because as we are discussing, some people can't get over to that. That I need a help. Sometimes they know it, but they don't want to accept it. That I need a help. Correct.
Definitely, there are lots of apps and out there, but a lot of them are also commercial by nature. So it's really difficult to say what is, which is actually science-based, which is evidence-based.
Yeah.
So I would trust, the big organizations in Australia, especially Beyond Blue, right? They have a phone line that you can call and, help set some strategies. They also have Black Dog is also there, which is for anxiety, right? There is another, like for men's line, there's, for men, there's support as well. There's a suicide callback service, which will provide you with support. So there's Lifeline as well, which can provide you with, crisis support. So I think the important thing is there are also online programs which are for free that people can do over 6 months. Like if you go to Black Dog, if you go to, Beyond Blue, you can sign up for an online course because, as you know, a lot of Australia is remote.
Yeah.
This challenge of not being able to access services is very common for the rural population.
Yeah.
Because they can't turn around tomorrow and go to a doctor. Some of them have to travel 2 hours to go and see a doctor, right? So psychiatrists, they have to wait for months. So they often can't get support immediately, even if they want to. So I tell people, try to find a program that's beneficial or, that you can at least try and commit to the whole thing. People start to feel better after 1 or 2 sessions of counseling and they stop, unfortunately.
That's usually happens.
Yeah. For, if you're trying to change something that you've been doing for all your life, you have to give it at least 6 sessions, correct?
Agree.
Right? So even if people feel better, and that's the biggest problem is that people drop off and then they have to restart again because it's not become a habit. It's not ingrained. They've talked about it. Oh, it makes sense. I'll do something, right? So it's like temporary relief, Nurofen ki tarah. So it doesn't really solve the problem. So that's what I say. People need to be consistent, but there are too many apps. Start with something basic. There's a really good website called headtohealth.gov.au. It's an Australian website which has got a good collection. So that might be a good place to go. We can put the link to that in the show notes.
Sure.
The other thing to remember is that if you don't want to see a counselor, if you don't want to see a therapist, that's fine. You don't have the funds for it. Sleep and some sort of movement is crucial for every human being. Okay. Your mental health is strongly connected to your physical health. So what you eat, how you move your body, how much rest you get plays a big part in how your brain responds to stress.
Right. And as you were mentioning, the 6 months course basically on Black Dog website or Beyond Blue.
Yeah.
So these courses are for free or we have to pay for it? If
they are free if you just do it online.
Yeah.
But you can also pay and get an online coach, who can support you through that process.
Right. And these organizations, for example, somebody's calling over the phone.
Yeah.
So the person on the other side of the phone, I believe they are all trained, certified counselors, right?
Yeah. Either counselors or psychologists. Yeah.
Okay. So they are from that category. It's not a standard customer service.
No, they have received some sort of training. There are some volunteer-run services. They also do recording. The conversation is confidential as well, right? So and you can call back, as many times as you like. Some of these free services, right?
Okay, right. As you have choose this profession, right? It's something as. In the starting, you mentioned that something lure you towards it. Does that basically you have faced that kind of challenge that actually lured you to become a counselor? Or I just want to know, what challenge you faced that you choose to come in this profession?
Yeah. Look, I was, when I first arrived here, I was happy. I had, my father was paying for my fees. I thankfully didn't have some of the challenges that other students had where they had taken a loan. So I was cruising, right? It was very comfortable. But like I said, there was a bit of a void. Then I ended up caring for a person, who I loved at the time. She went through a mental health breakdown.
Okay.
So while supporting her, I got to realize about how mental health works. And that made me realize that I was actually on the brink of having a breakdown myself. That made me aware of it. So, thankfully it was a wake-up call before things went pear-shaped for me.
Right.
So that's what made me, want to go and seek counseling and to be a better version of myself. And yeah, that was the trick. I mean, it took 3-4 years, and I was
to recover.
Not necessarily to recover, but actually to go through that process.
Oh, okay.
To actually figure out what is it that I was,
Would you mind telling that process, how you actually navigate that depression or mental health issue that you faced?
Yeah.
So how did you navigate that?
Asking for help, trying to find different ways that I could find help. Building an own community. Because at that point in time, when I was going through this struggle, my friends were all people who were studying in university with me. They could not relate to any of this. My parents could not relate to it. So I was kind of, on my own. So I was, I was focusing on getting this person get better. I was thinking about what can I do to help this person? How can I look at, how I support this person differently? So that's when I started to realize that there's other supports available, that there's support for myself, that I could go for counseling. So me going for counseling also helped me kind of, figure out. Then I ended up getting a job in IT because I didn't think like I could work in IT because I didn't really enjoy the course. So that was very, that was a bit of a question mark for me, because I was like, my father spent all this money on my course. I don't like the course. What am I going to do? So I wasn't getting a job. And then somehow my counselor said, why aren't you applying for a job in IT? What makes you think you don't deserve it? So then I applied, and then I got a job. And then, a few years later, I decided that I was going to do something else. So, life changes happen, right?
It does.
But thankfully, there was no one behind me telling me, this is not right, that's not right. I could make some of those decisions myself. It doesn't pay as much as IT, though. I have to tell people that. If money is important, then stay where you are.
That's what a person have to choose. They want money or self-satisfaction, I would say. In particular of this field, I would say you get more of self-satisfaction if you are after that, for sure. Yeah. But if you're after money, onto that, I actually want to know the other side, as in whoever is suffering from depression or any kind of that problem that we have discussed already. So I want to know your side, as you mentioned, like it doesn't pay well, right? Not as according to the IT, which most of the generation wants. We make more money instead of having a self-satisfaction.
Yeah.
What would you like other people to understand, right, for the real life experience working as a counselor?
So, look, I've come across a lot of people from multicultural backgrounds, and during my trainings and whatnot, and the people who are drawn towards this kind of work are people who are very caring. They want to give back to community. They want to have some sense of connection. When you're back in your home country, like in India, for example, you wouldn't have thought about it so much because you're already doing so much for so many people. All of a sudden, you come here, you've got your family, maybe you've got one or two friends, but you're not really giving back. You're not really serving others, right? So I think, if you feel like, there's a part of you that wants to serve other people, because giving, helping others helps us. So this is, what I tell people is that this is actually a selfish act for me, because I'm looking after myself by being of use to other people, right? For me, that gives me, that makes me feel fuller. So for people, I think, if you want to pursue a career that's caring, or you want to do some caring work, volunteering is always a good place to start, right? Because once you start to show interest, then people, organizations always want people who are caring, especially if you're male, especially if you're from a multicultural background. Organizations want you because it's not often that they come across. But the only way they can find that out is through the work that you do, not necessarily through your qualification. I have never gotten a job because of my, degree in counseling. I've always, been able to find jobs because people have seen me in action before, and they know how I operate. They know what I sound like, what I look like, what I talk about. And that's why, I've been approached for different kinds of work. So I would tell people, look, if you want to take up this career, you don't have to go into full-fledged work. You can still do your work, and maybe once a fortnight you volunteer somewhere in a counseling or caring capacity where you feel like, you're giving to others without expecting something in return.
Right. Last question before we wrap this episode.
Yes.
As you mentioned, if somebody wants to go into this field, right, I just want to know what actually involved getting into this field, like studying wise, what kind of diploma or degree we need to become a certified counselor.
Yeah.
And is there any legislations that we have to do after finishing the course?
Yeah.
Especially for the young people who want to pursue in this kind of field?
So, look, there's a difference between psychology, there's a difference between counseling, right? Counseling is more relational. We talk about, how do we relate to people? Psychology more focused on the brain, the science of the brain. It's more research-based, right? Some people don't necessarily realize that. Psychology is more recognized in Australia than counseling is. Counseling is still an unregulated profession. So unfortunately, anyone can call themselves a counselor, right? Some people choose to go and do a study. You can either do a diploma in mental health. You can do a diploma in counseling if you want to start. So that's always a good place to, get started in. And also doing some volunteering gives you an idea of, who's doing what. You can go and study social work. You can become a psychologist if you like. Just depends on which, what actually drives you. Some people love numbers. Some people, love the kind of work that they're doing. It's always a good idea to think about, okay, where do I picture myself sitting? Do I picture myself, sitting one-on-one with an individual? Do I picture myself sitting in a hospital, helping people? That gives you a distinction. But start small. Don't sign up to a really significant course. If you're not sure what you want to do, sign up to some of the newsletters from different counseling colleges or schools and see what they talk about. Go to a webinar, go to an open day. That's what I did. I went to an open day. I saw the school. I kind of looked at the course. I saw, okay, this will help me myself. So I was looking at helping myself first, and then it ended up becoming a profession in itself.
No, that's actually a great knowledge, and I would say interesting topic, especially for workplace health management and that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for giving your time today, and it's a pleasure having such of good knowledge from you. Thank you so much, Vinay.
Thanks for listening.
And that's a wrap on this powerful episode of Real Talks with Rohit Jaichand. Big thanks to Vinay Nair for bringing clarity and real talk to the topic of mental health. So if you are struggling, please reach out. You are not alone. And if someone on your mind who needs help, send them a message. It can change everything for them. And also don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear this. Until next time, keep showing up, keep checking in, and as always, keep it real.